Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how bad user feedback changed my indie travel app and saved it from certain failure. So I'm building a travel app that creates maps of your travels. I'm calling it TravelMap. My wife and I do a good bit of traveling, so I like having an easy way to reflect and share where we've been. Ideally, one a little bit more engaging than, a very long list. And here's a screenshot of it. So after building and releasing the initial version, I used it to map my 2023 travels. It worked fine, so I figured it was ready for broader release. And here's my 2023 travels, minus that one. We didn't go there. So I enlisted my perfect customer, my wife. She loves traveling and posting things on social, so I figured if she didn't want to use this thing, no one would. The app allowed me to map my own travels, so surely she would be able to use it to map hers as well. After all, we went to the same places. Now, as you might expect, she did not, in fact, map her own travels. Software rarely survives initial contact with the real world. So I thought this would be a fun case study to share what went wrong and some of the evolutions of the app to try and survive first contact. After all, we're always testing in prod, so you might as well find good techniques for doing so fast and safe. In the rest of this post, I'll share the feedback I got from my app's first user and how it changed the app for good. The State of TravelMap. So here's a screenshot of TravelMap. And basically what we can see is it's pretty bare bones. I got a little nav bar here. You can click this to learn more about it. We've got a big map thing, and we've got some markers on the map. And then we can see we've got a little table down here with just a few coordinates, and these coordinates correspond with this. As you change these guys, it will change these guys. And these are editable little inputs. You can add a new row with this, and then there's some controls for like cloning a coordinate or deleting one or moving it up and down to change the order, because the markers will draw lines between them in order because, that's how travel works. You go from one place to another, no teleporting or apparition in this reality. And so, this was enough functionality for me to create that basic map of my 2023 travels that I showed you earlier. But of course, it was not enough for my first user, and thus why we're here in this post. All right, problem 1. No one knows LatLong Coordinates. My wife referred to this first iteration as unusable. And here's me, paraphrasing what her journey was like. So she used the app, and then she was like, no one knows LatLong Coordinates. I just want to type in the location and put it on the map. What do you expect me to do? Go look up the coordinates and copy them into the site? And the answer is yes. In fact, that is what I expected people to do. That's what I did to make my 2023 travel map, so I expected others to do that as well. Sure, it was a bit clunky, but it did the job I hired it for, making me a map. But I think this is a good lesson. It doesn't really matter what you think or want, it really matters what the customer wants. And here's 2 takeaways, kind of recurring themes that this kind of reminded me of. The first is that you don't really know what the customer wants. So and I guess, many others doing similar things with their side projects often think we know what the customer wants. But the truth is you may not be representative of the customer, assuming you're like me and you're building for like problems that you face yourself. Because even if you have the same problem as your customers, and thus, the solution works for you, there may be other variables at play that cause the solutions or understanding to not fully apply. Or I also often think of this as like it probably does apply, but it might not be precise. So you might be like a subsegment of some kind of customer, but you might actually be wholly different from the main population of the customer for the simple fact that you are in a position to solve this thing for yourself, whereas an actual customer who's paying you for it either can't or won't. And so in the end, you must test and prod to find out. The next thing that is one that I always forget. It's really that customers have very low patience. And I think the reason I always forget this is because, I think many other engineers, we tend to have like a pretty thick skin when it comes to technology problems. We're used to things breaking and the work required to debug it. And that's largely what we're paid to do. And I'm sure like even outside of your job, you get asked to like fix the printer or like, oh, the Xbox isn't working or like the TV inputs are like messed up or like, why is the website doing this? Or like, why is this thing overheating? You get pulled into all these things and you're probably pretty good at this if you're an engineer. And so you're kind of used to this and you built up like a callus, if you will, to this kind of work because this just happens all the time for you. And I guess if you didn't, you probably wouldn't keep doing this because, that's what you have to do. But the difference is that like most people, and like certainly most people who are actually going to pay you, do not have this patient curiosity, because, those that do have it might just go off and fix it themselves because they have the patience to fix it. So really the people you're targeting, the people who are going to pay for this thing, that are going to go out of their way to use it, are the ones that can't solve it or won't solve it for themselves. And so they don't have this patience. And so when they come to like a thing that you've built, really it's like they hired it for this job, and it either does that thing or it doesn't. And they're not going to like mess around to debug it and figure out like a good way to do it. And so all this said, I had this thing that I thought was nice to have, but it actually turned out to be pretty important. And so important that I couldn't even get my wife, who's basically my perfect customer, to use it. And if I'd kept building based on my own experience without testing in prod, because, this is a problem that I have, and so I built this thing to solve my own problems, I would have never known this was an issue. And, TravelMap likely would have wilted away with zero usage, joining dozens of my other dead projects that had the same kind of trajectory. And so what I did to solve this is really just do the simplest thing to see if this would actually unblock the user journey. And basically what I did is I just added a little search by address here, and you can just put this in, and then I basically will convert it to a LatLong, and I'll show you what this is. And then you can just click this button and it'll add up here if you like that. Nice, crisis averted. Now it will surely work. So I gave it back to my wife, and she used it. She started putting stuff on the map, and everything was dandy. Until it wasn't. Problem 2, I can't figure out which location is which. And so my wife had basically created a map that looked like this. There were several locations on it. She had New York, she had Spain, she had San Diego, all places we'd been, but then also there was this point in Africa. Now we'd been to these 3, but we hadn't been to Africa, and so she was confused on why it was there, and she was trying to delete it. The problem is that we kind of have this, list of coordinates, and she couldn't actually figure out which of these coordinates was the one here, and she wasn't willing to experiment with it, and so she kind of just bounced off and gave up. Now, obviously, if you're like an engineer and you have the patience and the curiosity to actually solve this thing, you would have realized that it's on the end of the lines, and you probably just try this one or this one. You might copy and paste it so you can have the lat-longs later, and then you could pretty easily get rid of that. But again, customers actually have low patience for this kind of stuff. Now, on reflection, this was largely due to the solution of problem 1 not actually solving the full problem that she is facing. So you can search by address to put things on the map, but the locations still are appearing as lat-longs. So when you have several locations, greater than 5, probably when it starts becoming a problem, it becomes increasingly hard to differentiate which is which, because people don't really think in coordinates. If I just told you 4040, that is a place on a map somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. You probably have no idea where it is. It's just not how we think about these things. So I went back to the drawing board and ended up with a simpler design that allows you to label markers while still providing lat-long visibility, because, that's how locations work. This meant moving the lat-long controls lower and removing the ability to update them in line, but overall, I think it makes the interface much simpler. And so here's an example of that. It's the same locations that we saw earlier, but now we can see that we have little labels there, and so you can actually make them human readable to yourself. This can be the actual name of the place, or you can put in a custom marker so that you kind of know what that thing is. And again, this is something I probably wouldn't have built for myself because it doesn't really seem necessary. Lat-longs are how coordinates work, so they must be good enough. And honestly, when I think about turning addresses into lat-longs, I think about all of the potential edge cases of how it could get this wrong. San Diego, there's actually many San Diegos around the world, so you actually have to be precise enough to know it's the San Diego you want, and you can't really know that until you add it to a map. And this is an edge case that makes me think this is a blocker, but actually this is something that other people are willing to deal with because it makes more sense to them. But that's why we test in prod. Prod proved my assumptions false, and in the end, prod is the only source of truth. Thus, why it's good to test in prod, and really, you're always testing in prod even if you don't believe that, so you might as well just test in prod. Next. So this is where TravelMap stands today. You can follow this link. It's at travelmap.xyz, and you can map your own journeys. But my wife has promised to try it once again with these new features I've built, so I can't promise it will be the same by the time you read this. Change is inevitable. An app never deploys in the same prod twice, for it's not the same prod, nor it the same app. So what do we do about this? We test in prod. Now, if you like this post, you might also like how I built TravelMap, going through some of the technologies I chose and a little bit why I like them. HTMX versus Alpine, which should you choose for your web app? I'm pretty into the Low.js movement right now, and TravelMap is mostly built with Alpine with a little bit of HTMX, and they're helping with server interactivity. And so here's my thoughts on what each of these is good for and why you should choose it and when. And finally, you might be interested in 3 areas I'm exploring to build more side projects faster and cheaper in 2024, TravelMap being one of those side projects using these new techniques. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.